Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
And Jenny, today I'm going to hit you with a bus. Drive right over you.
Oh, well, great. Can't wait.
I hope you're ready.
Oh, I'm ready.
Right after this. I won't do that. That would be...
Hopefully you don't actually hit me with the bus.
Hopefully not. I mean, that would be mean, and also, I mean, this is like a highlight of my week to get to record this podcast, so I'd lose that. And
you'd have to find a new co-host. That would be really terrible.
Or I'd just talk to myself for...
You could do that too.
20 minutes, I could do that too, but that's probably not as much fun. So,
You'd never be wrong, though.
Well, you never know. You don't know. So today we are talking about being hit by a bus. It's not a fun topic. It is though, I think, an important topic because a lot of agency owners haven't given any thought to what happens if something happens to them.
Yes.
And I would also say, while we're going to be talking about this in terms of agency owners, it's true really of any key employee. So just like you need to have a hit by a bus plan for yourself, you need to be thinking about this if you've got someone who's the reservoir of knowledge for something in particular in your business. So you can apply these lessons there as well. So let's say that you are one of those really proactive people. You do have a hit by a bus plan already for yourself. Make sure you have it for the team around you as well. It doesn't necessarily need to be as detailed because the problems tend to be smaller and more easily dealt with, but it's still important for some of the things that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I think probably many of us think about it, like what happens if, but we don't have the plan in place. And I, this isn't a super fun topic because we don't like to think of ourselves as going anywhere or having anything happen that would prevent us from working. But the fact of the matter is that every single one of us is going to have that happen, and whether or not we're prepared for it is what we need to talk about today.
Right. And there are a lot of simple things that we don't think about that we can do now that will make things a lot easier if something does happen to us. And by something happening, we're not always talking about death. In fact, in some ways, that's the neatest and cleanest and easiest.
Fair.
In part because you get to say, hey, ain't my problem anymore.
Not my problem.
Someone else can deal with this. Most of us probably aren't quite that blasé about it, but the most difficult is actually if something happens to you and you become disabled in some fashion where you are unable to execute on the business in any form, but you still want it to take care of you and you still want to have access to your funds and all of that kind of thing that are tied up in the business. And all of those things become more complicated if you haven't planned in advance.
Yeah. And I mean, anything could happen. Like I have a very close friend who the day before Thanksgiving, he had a headache and he had a fever and his fever got to 104 degrees. So he went to urgent care and urgent care was like, take some Tylenol and go to bed. So he did. And it got progressively worse overnight. And so he went to the emergency room and it turns out he has leukemia and he's been in the hospital since Thanksgiving Day. And we're recording this at the end of January. So, he hasn't been able to work. He hasn't been able to, show up for clients. He hasn't been able to do any of those things. He's been able to lie in a hospital room and sit on Facebook because that's about all he has energy for. So we know everything that's going on. But the point is that like anything could happen. And he's lucky in the fact that he's been able to sort of offload things to his second in charge and give them, bank passwords and all that kind of stuff to be able to access it. But, if let's say that he were Damar Hamlin, who had the heart attack during the football game and was out of commission for 5 days, like when you're in a medically induced coma, you can't give out passwords and make sure that the second in charge is having, like, so things happen and we have to be prepared for those things. In my case, my husband has the passwords to the bank accounts. And I don't know whether or not that's the right thing to do, but that's how we've done it in my business, just because I don't have a second in charge that would be able to access those kinds of things. So that's how we've done it. But insurance, disability, long-term, short-term, life, all those kinds of things you need to be thinking about for when, because it's not if, it's when this happens. Something happens.
Right. And it may or may not happen when you still own your business and
Right.
all that. But I mean, the only certainties in life are death and taxes, right? So we know it's going to happen at some point. You might as well prepare for it now. I think the most obvious thing that you need to be thinking about are passwords, whether that's for your bank account or if you've got a team, access to, whatever software that you're using to keep the business running. So you need to make sure that you've got that information either already in the hands of people or there's some way to do it. So a lot of these password managers have
Yep.
things where you can have
You
someone
just
else
switch
get
the,
access if they request approval and they don't hear from you within a week or whatever. They say, okay, well, something's happened to so and so now you can get access. Or I mean, heck, just put it on a piece of paper in an envelope. I mean, in one of my early businesses, I had an envelope in my desk that said hit by a bus. It was sealed and it had some key passwords and other information that my business partner or others might need in the event that something happened to me. And the key people knew where it lived and they could go get it. It was very low tech. This does not have to be something high tech. So passwords are the most obvious. I think they're the things that people think of the most. But the other thing that you need to think about is who are your authorized contacts, because just having the password
That's a
may
great
not
point.
be enough.
Yep.
And so with something like a bank account, we often think, oh, well, we'll just give you the login information. Well, that's great, but you may not be an authorized signer. Since we
Right.
do so much electronically these days, you can kind of get away with that a lot, but it's still at some point you're probably going to need to have signing access to a bank account. You're going to need to be an authorized person for the insurance company that has the insurance for all of your employees. I mean, we just had a situation in my own business where we were trying to do an administrative change to something, and so my wife called to get it done. She couldn't because she wasn't listed as authorized
Yep.
on it. And it was something, it was frankly, it was trying to electronically pay the bills instead of doing them by paper check, because we've had the account so long, we've stuck with paper check, but it's the last paper check we do. We don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
They wouldn't even talk to her to let her pay the bill.
Wow.
So you need to think about those things because, for example, I mean, let's say it is the health insurance. Let's say that you, the owner, are in a coma. You'd kind of like that health insurance to keep going. If your team doesn't have someone who's authorized who can contact them and be able to pay the bill, you're in trouble.
Yeah. And I will say from that
so
perspective,
think about those things.
From that perspective, we have our accounting firm do all that. So they can pay the insurance bills. They're a signer on the account, so they can pay all the bills as well. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that works for you, because for me, I was afraid that we would lose that if the person left that had access, we would have to go through that whole process again. So I just did it so that our accounting firm handles it all, and then I don't have to worry about if someone leaves, quits, and then I have to go through that whole process of reassigning somebody else. So there are lots of ways that you can do it that, if somebody just hits the easy button, so to say, all those things are taken care of.
Right. And in our case, we actually have an insurance broker that we were able to work through. So I didn't have to sit on hold with the insurance company to authorize Jen.
Yes.
I just said to the broker, you guys deal with this.
Yes.
So there was already a backup plan of sorts in place. But, you want to make sure that you're thinking about that for all of your key accounts, whether that's payroll, whether that's banking, whether that's benefits. There are a lot of things that are important to you as the owner or to your estate if you pass away that someone needs to have access to, and it gets really complicated if you don't have that access.
Yeah, and then I would say the other thing you need to be thinking about, especially for agency owners, is what happens with clients. So let's say that you're my friend who was diagnosed with leukemia on Thanksgiving Day and has been in the hospital for almost 3 months. A little more than 3 months. What do you do in that case with clients? And most of us, because we're the agency owner, are client facing, and some of our accounts are run by our team, and some of our accounts, on my side, some of our very high paying and crisis accounts, I'm face to face with, right? And then some of the other stuff where we're just doing the execution and day-to-day work for clients, I pop in once a month for conversations with the CEO, but I don't have the same day-to-day face time that I do. So those would be okay. It's the clients where I have day-to-day face time that I have to be thinking about how those things are handled.
Yeah, and it's important to think about how you communicate these things too. And we've talked a lot on this show about how we are all communicators, yet we are typically very bad when it comes to our own communications, whether
Yes.
that's internal or external. And so it can be difficult, particularly if you're in a situation where you have, some sort of illness that's going to keep you on the sidelines for a long period of time. There are some people who are not comfortable talking about that for whatever reason. There are other
Yes.
people who live more with an open book style. I've got to tell you, I think the more transparent you are in general, the better, because people pick up on things, and if you
Yeah.
kind of start disappearing, they will fill the gap of
Yes, they
knowledge
will.
by making stuff up.
Yes, they will. That is
Now,
true.
that said, it's not, I will say that there are risks. I think many people know that I've had two heart surgeries for an irregular heartbeat over the last, I don't know, 20 years or so. And in one of those cases where I was transparent about it, I know I lost some business as a result, because there was a prospect who was concerned about my ability to to go forward on the project as a result of that. And it was silly, because I was very transparent about what it all meant, and it was basically a day long procedure kind of thing, and you're back to normal at least from a mental standpoint right away, and all that. But still, I know it can impact things, so people are hesitant. But I would still encourage you, be as transparent as possible, because otherwise people are going to wonder, they're going to guess, and that's often worse than the
Way
truth.
worse. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think you have to be. I think this is unfortunate, but I think you do have to be ready to lose some accounts, because even when you say, "Well, nothing's going to change because so and so is your day to day," and like all of that's still going to be the same, for some reason they get this thing in their head where they're like, "Oh, but is it really?" And what if they're back there, behind the scenes doing things that we
Right.
don't know, and then they start to, sort of catastrophize almost, and then I would say be prepared to lose some clients over it, which sucks, but you have to understand too that this is business, not personal.
Yeah, but this is yet another reason why, as an owner, you shouldn't tie yourself too tightly to your
Yes.
clients, and you need to make
Yes.
sure that you're
Yes.
involving your team. Even if you are a solo owner and just using contractors, get more people in front of the client on a regular
Yes.
basis, so that, because look, clients have real issues when the owner disappears from an equation, if the owner is deeply involved, but they don't have the same reaction most of the time when it's an
When a
employee or a
client. Yep.
contractor.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
so
Yep.
the more that you can divorce yourself from that day-to-day client work, the more that you can preserve those kinds of relationships, even if something does happen to you. And so it's really an argument for doing what you should already be doing anyway, but it will certainly help you in your hit by a bus planning as well.
One of the things I like to do is take time off, like everybody else, and I prepare the team so that I can take time off and I'm not constantly bombarded with emails and text messages and Slack messages and I need this and I can. So I prepare the team, and then when I come back, I expect them to continue to be working in that manner. So nobody misses me. It's great. And
Yeah.
the first year I did it, I was like, wait, nobody missed me. And it's sort of, your ego is sort of burned a little bit. And then I thought, well, wait, this is great. Now I'm going to
Right.
go focus on business development because I have time to do it. They can continue doing this work. I can take time off. It's not a big deal. If I'm hit by a bus, it's going to suck, but it's not going to be to the detriment of my business.
Right. And I think all of this planning helps. I think that you also need to be thinking about the financial aspects of what if something happens. So this is why you need to be thinking about making sure you have cash reserves as a business, particularly if you have employees, because even if you're hit by a bus plan is that you're going to unwind the business. Let's say you're a sole owner, a small team, and you say, look, I don't really want to, I don't have an obvious successor, and so my hit by a bus plan is just to to have an orderly shutdown of the business. It should be orderly, and so you need cash to have it happen in an
Yes.
orderly fashion, and to
Yes.
treat your team well. And a lot of agency owners love to say, well, we're really a family here. First of all, you're not. We've
You're
had
not.
that discussion.
Right.
But secondly, if you're going to say that, at least try to take care of them a little bit, and don't have something happens to you means something effectively has happened to them. I mean, this isn't ancient Egypt, and we're not burying our team with us. So you need to be thoughtful about those kinds of things. And so having a cash reserve, thinking about things like insurance is important. Insurance, certainly disability insurance, is probably the most important thing to think
Yes.
about, because
Yes.
frankly, death is, as we said earlier, it's the cleanest, it's the easiest. It's when you can't work, if you're in that, medically induced coma or unmedically induced coma, whatever, those are the times where you want to have something that's continuing to provide financial stability. So think about not just life insurance, but also disability insurance.
And I would add to that one of the things that you and I have talked about on this podcast before is if you're looking to sell your business eventually, you have to have in there a salary that's for yourself,
Right.
that's worth, because a possible acquirer is not going to look at your business and profit and go, oh, they're super profitable, but wait, they're not paying themselves a salary. And the same goes for that with disability. So in short-term disability, you get a certain percentage, and in long-term disability, you get a certain percentage. So if you're not paying yourself a living salary, if you're paying yourself $30,000 a year, you're going to get 60% of $30,000. And that's not going to help you. So really be thinking about, as part of your hit by a bus plan, how do you start to build that fund up so that you're paying yourself what you would be paid if you worked for a corporation, and make that relevant in your own business, because then it serves multiple purposes. But in this scenario, if you're paying yourself $250,000 a year, now your long-term disability is going to pay 60% of that instead of 60% of 30,000.
Right. And so these are all things that you want to pre-plan for. And if you're, most of what we've talked about now applies for agencies of any kind, whether you're a sole owner or you have a partnership. But this is something you also need to be thinking about in a partnership in a little bit of a different way, because
Right.
in some respects, it's easier when you have partners because you've now got someone who, logically would take over running the business from you. Let's say there's two of you. But there are also some complicating factors in there, some of which we've already talked about, as far as making sure that authorized signers are in place. It's not uncommon in partnerships to have just one partner who is the signer on the bank account, for example, just because it was more convenient. You didn't have to fill out the extra signature card, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that that's not the case. Make sure that you've got additional people having access to everything. Make sure that your partner or partners are listed as authorized contacts, all those kinds of things.
Yes.
But this is where you should also be thinking about insurance in a different way, which is, do you have key person life insurance in place? So, and key person life insurance in a partnership serves two purposes. One is it can provide funding for the business so that the work that you've been doing for the business, they can hire someone to do in your place, right? Because
that's really great advice.
If you've been providing client service and you have a particular expertise that maybe your partner doesn't have, or even if it's just a workload thing, they're going to have to absorb that. Now, that is not a cheap thing to do, particularly because now you've got a situation where your estate would own part of the agency, which means that it's a drag on the profits of the business because it's still, presumably, depending on how you're set up, entitled to a percentage of the profits. Let's say you've got a 50-50 agency, and you can go to my website and find out why you shouldn't have a true 50-50 agency. Again, topic for another day. But so now you've got an estate that owns 50%, takes 50% of the profits, but is doing nothing to contribute to the economic growth of the business. And so typically when you have a partner die, you want to buy their estate out as quickly as possible in order to move that along. If you have key person life insurance on a partner, you can use the proceeds typically to buy out the estate.
That is really great advice.
And so it positions you in a much better place. But these are things that you want to be thinking about well in advance so that you can be prepared for them. And you've got to, and frankly, a lot of this is necessary because partnerships don't think these issues through very well at the beginning.
Right.
And so think these things through, but probably you need to do the earlier steps, which are have the proper partnership agreements in place, because a lot of the partnerships I talk to don't. They have very basic, templated type stuff, but it hasn't thought through all of these different scenarios. And you need to make sure that your paperwork as a partnership addresses what happens if you're short-term disabled, long-term disabled, die, divorce, all of these horrible things you don't want to spend a lot of time dwelling on really, really matter, even more so in a partnership because it's impacting a whole lot more people.
Yeah. I mean, it's crisis planning is what you're doing. You're looking at your different scenarios, you're tearing them out, and you're saying, okay, in this situation, we're going to do this, this, and this. This situation is worse. We're going to do this and this is catastrophic, and this is how we'll handle it. And unfortunately, just like our clients, we don't worry about crisis planning insurance until we need it. And then that's too late. So really be thinking about those things right now. I think thinking about it about key person insurance is really great advice. And really, think about everything from, can someone pay my bills and access my bank account and deposit checks, to do we have the insurance that will cover me and my core team? And what happens if, God forbid, I do die, and what happens to the business and my employees and all of that?
Yeah. And the final thing I would say is just keep it simple. You don't need to overcomplicate this. You don't need to imagine every single possible scenario and work it out, because if you figure out just a handful of them, you can probably take the steps necessary to make sure that you're in a good enough place if the worst happens. And so, one of the things I do see is people get, wrapped around trying to figure out, well, okay, well, but what happens if this lasts for 3 months or 5 months or so? Don't worry about that. You cannot foresee every possible outcome and scenario.
Right.
So just try to deal with a couple of the big ones, and that will probably put you in good position for you and your business to move forward if and when it happens.
Yep. That's really good advice. Not something we want to be thinking about, but something we have to deal with.
Yep. It is necessary. It's as a business owner, sometimes we got to think about things we don't want to think about.
That's right.
This is probably number one on the don't want to think about it list, but I'm encouraging you to do that.
Necessary. It's necessary. Do it.
Necessary. All right. On that note, we will draw this episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast to a close. I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Gini Dietrich.
And it depends.